Welcome to Body Kindness. I'm Rebecca Scritchfield, creator of the Body Kindness Philosophy book and audiobook. I'm here to help you create a better life by reinventing health from the body oppressive, shaming, and you'll never be enough type of mindset to positive and joyful ways that you can spiral up your energy, mood, and your well being at any size, shape, or weight, and as you are right now. Get started for free at bodykindnessbook.com/start. That's the sound of me smashing a stack of scales in front of some friends. And I have to say that breaking up with the scale and all the other ways I was judging, monitoring, and measuring my worth was absolutely pivotal in my life. Creating the body kindness philosophy and letting myself be a human being again helped me become a better mom, a better clinician, and a happier and healthier person. I believe we all have a right to decide how we want to care for ourselves. And I think we all need support in figuring out what that looks like. You don't have to do this alone. There's a whole community of like-minded people who are fed up with diets, who are embracing intuitive eating, and who are completely redefining their lives from body shame to body kindness. You are not broken. Our culture is. Find your inner caregiver and create a better life with body kindness.
Beyond that, there is a great deal about what it means to be female in our culture and young, but also just female. So young female, but also female in our culture that is extraordinarily hard on girls and young women. And, this is your work being just a shining example of that. And there's a great deal that parents can do to buffer that for their daughters and also to not unwittingly participate in it. And so those were my two main aims in writing this book was, let's get a big public service announcement out there about how we should be thinking about stress and anxiety, because how we think about it shapes how we experience it. And then the other is, hey, we love our girls. We want to do right by them. And there may be ways in which we are unwittingly making it worse when we could be making it better.
I'm loving this show today, all about anxiety and girls with bestselling author Dr. Lisa Damour and her new book, Under Pressure, Confronting the Epidemic of Stress and Anxiety in Girls. So in this episode, we talk about stress and anxiety in general. We talk about what's normal and actually beneficial for teen girls, when you should worry, as well as the options available for talking with girls and young women to reduce their stress and anxiety on everything from embracing their bodies, dating, girls in the schools, setting boundaries, even with adults, and how to say no. And we get into an important conversation on microaggressions and racism and other pressures from our culture that girls can't control, but we as parents and helping professionals can help all girls get through a little bit better and also build resilience. Lisa, welcome to Body Kindness.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
I cannot wait to talk to you. I'm so excited. I always love to tell listeners how I came to know my guests. And so when I was writing Body Kindness, your previous book, Untangled, was already out, already a bestseller. And I read an article about it, downloaded it immediately, devoured it in one of my long walks. And even though my kids were young at the time, I was like, this is going to be a book that's going to help me now with my clients, but it's also going to help me as my girls get older. And then kind of I think it was my agent saw that I posted all about how much I love the book on Facebook. And then she said, hey, Lisa's in our agency. And I was like, this is amazing. But I just loved your first book, and I'm so excited that you did another one, and which we're going to talk about on our show today. But I wanted to just start, if you don't mind telling the listeners a little bit about yourself and your background.
Sure, sure. So I'm a clinical psychologist, and the focus of my work going into its third decade it has been largely adolescent girls.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trained as a general psychologist. I was trained in both child and adult work, and I do take care of some grown-ups and some little kids. But mostly my practice and my writing and my consulting work centers around adolescent girls.
Mm-hmm.
So I wrote Untangled, which came out 3 years ago, which is a book about normal development in teenagers. And I articulate in that book a model of adolescent development that applies to boys and girls, but I go into the details on the girl version of it.
Mm-hmm.
And then I also write a monthly column for the New York Times on adolescence, and that tends to be co-ed. So that occasionally I'll do something that's a little tipped towards one gender or the other, but mostly that's just about teenagers in general. And then the book that just came out, which is Under Pressure, which the full title is Under Pressure, Confronting the Epidemic of Stress and Anxiety in Girls. And this book picks up on the reality that parents are hearing about and dealing with levels of stress and anxiety that we have not seen before in all teenagers and then in girls in particular. And so this book is my effort to help parents understand stress and anxiety, understand their healthy and normal aspects, and then also equip parents to shield their daughters from unnecessary stress and anxiety and help their daughters respond to it in ways that will help them grow and gain strength as opposed to becoming more cautious and more with, kind of more narrow in how they interact with the world.
Mm-hmm. So I mean, this is such an urgently important book. I see the high levels of stress and anxiety in my private nutrition and exercise, kind of like healthy living counseling practice in DC. So I see it as a clinician too. Like, for example, parents will bring their kids in and they'll say, well, we've been to a gastroenterologist, we have a diagnosis of IBS, and we heard that, following low FODMAP might be helpful. And it's something that I do with clients. But what I found so interesting is when you get them in and you start to have conversations about what their life is like and what's happening with them, they're actually living with high levels of anxiety and the GI symptoms they're
Yeah.
experiencing, the nausea that
Yep.
they're experiencing. It's not necessarily going to be remedied by altering your food patterns, which is what the low FODMAP would be. It's actually treating the anxiety. And so whether it's we start with deep breath and meditation
Hmm.
work
Hmm.
or practicing with lavender oil, and even those are kind of like Band-Aids, right? Because ultimately you've got to get to what's the issue with time or why is the worry so excessive? So I certainly can see the very urgent need for this as a clinician. But my first question for you is like, I feel like something had to happen, some event in your life or something that just clicked for you that wasn't just like, I kind of feel like writing another book and this is the next logical step. I have a feeling there's a story. And so I want to know the juice behind like, why is it so urgent to you that we have to talk about this and we have to face this head on?
Well, there's two reasons. So one is that I see teenagers in my private practice, but I also spend 2 days a week consulting to a girls' school in my community, and I've been there for 15 years.
Mm-hmm.
So there I am really in the day-to-day of girls' lives. It's an
Mm-hmm.
interesting thing. When you have a private practice, you see them in this, very focused, sort of isolated
Mm-hmm.
50 minutes, what they choose to share, what happens to come up. Whereas, the beauty of getting to spend time in a school and in the same school for 15 years is that I get to watch girls over time and I see them over the course of a day and I see them with their friends and I see them at lunch and I see them, being goofy in the hall or having a meltdown in the hall. I mean, it's like, I get to see sort of the variety of adolescent development. And what I've observed is that 15 years ago, we
Mm-hmm.
talked about stress some and we talked not about anxiety much at all.
Mm-hmm.
And in the intervening 15 years, those two words have become part of almost every sentence it feels like I'm having with teachers or girls or parents. And I live in Ohio and we're seeing it here, but I also spend a lot of time traveling to schools around the country. And I can
Mm-hmm.
tell you, it's probably tamer here than it is in other places I go. Certainly I feel on the coasts, things are actually up a level from the Midwest in terms of a sense of stress and anxiety. So that that experience of watching the sands really shift and wondering what it was all about, that was one reason. Another reason, and this is probably closer to my heart,
Mm-hmm.
less sort of observational, more sort of where I come from as a psychologist, is that as academic and clinical psychologists, we are not particularly worried about stress and anxiety. Those are not two human challenges that we feel unsure about, or that we feel we don't really know how to treat, or we feel we don't really understand.
Mm-hmm.
We understand anxiety, we understand stress, we understand their fundamental mechanisms. We've understood them for a very long time. What we know about anxiety and a lot of what we know about stress right now are principles that have, we continue to refine them, but the basics we've had a really good handle on for decades. And so, one of the things that fascinates me as a clinical psychologist is this huge gulf between where clinicians and people who have studied and really worked with us and trained with us for a long time, where we stand on stress and anxiety, which is, oh yeah, they're uncomfortable and inconvenient. To a great degree, they're healthy and normal. And when they're not healthy and normal, we really have a good feeling for what to do to fix it. That's sort of where we are with it. I think another way to
Mm-hmm.
put it is there are a lot of things where we're like, oh, we can diagnose it, but we don't know what to tell you, right? Or um, we can describe it, but we don't have the treatments we need. Like I think there's a
Mm-hmm.
lot of what we work with that is in that category, and stress and anxiety are not. So that's where the clinicians are. And then, you know, hundreds of yards away, it feels like has where the popular culture has gotten to on this, which is this wholesale pathologizing of anxiety and this wholesale pathologizing of stress,
Mm-hmm.
which I suspect may actually be contributing to the problem, right? That I think we've come to a place in our culture where people feel anxious about even being anxious, and they feel stressed about even being stressed, which cannot be making it better. So I think for me, when I think, why did I write this book? There are two big reasons. One reason is to say, hey, we don't have to be so frightened of stress and anxiety. They are
Mm-hmm.
healthy and normal, and here's how they operate, and here's how they come into your life in really adaptive and productive ways. And here's how you know you're in trouble, right? So I
Mm-hmm.
really, as a person who was trained in this and has worked in this for a long time, I just wanted to get that message, like a big public service announcement, that I want to
Mm-hmm.
make. That's one thing I had in my mind. The other is, beyond that, there is a great deal about what it means to be female in our culture, and
Mm-hmm.
young, but also just female. So young female, but also female in our culture, that is extraordinarily hard on girls and young women. And, this is your work being just
Mm-hmm.
a shining example of that. And there's a great deal that parents can do to buffer that for their daughters, and also to not unwittingly participate in it.
Mm.
And so those were my two main aims in writing this book was, let's get a big public service announcement out there about how we should be thinking about stress and anxiety, because how we think about it shapes how we experience it.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other is, hey, we love our girls, we want to do right by them, and there may be ways in which we are unwittingly making it worse when we could be making it better.
Yeah. I think that's exactly right. It's reminding me, like, when I think of times when I was growing up, like, I remember where there were times of stress that were stressful, right? Like, I knew that we had so first of all, I don't know if you know this, but I'm from Ohio. I'm from Austintown, Ohio, like in the
I did
Northeast.
not know that.
Yes.
No.
So, but I remember that, that there were times, I could tell even as a kid that we were stretching our dollar, and, that there were, we were lucky to have a house and food on the table. So we had jobs, things weren't that bad, but I could tell my parents were stressed and had money worries, and that did impact me. Then there would be times where it was like, it felt like every time stress was experienced, it was a bad thing. And even, just as I became an adult and through college and even through counseling a client, if a client was stressed, I really think I built the belief that like, and also it does kind of exist out there in the media too, right? Like stress is going to kill you.
Yeah.
Stress is worse than smoking or whatever the headline might be, right? So we all start to believe like that all stress is bad or that
Yeah.
that you have to fight it, like dig in. And it was actually, I don't know if you know Dr. Kelly McGonigal.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
so I read her book, The Upside of Stress, and I was like, oh my gosh, stress is energy. And so with that idea, that really actually was the first time, and I was, I mean, maybe my early 40s, but it took me a long time to even understand the concept that there could be good parts of stress, and there's nothing out there that explains this. And two adults who may not, it's kind of like you can only take people as far as you have gone, right? So it's like they might not have the tools that they need, and they have kids who are going through that right
Yep.
now. And your book is kind of coming in and saying, here's some tools, and let me help you understand this a bit better. To your point of adding anxiety, having anxiety about the anxiety is making it worse. Parents really do have this role to play to better understand it and to better buffer, to let their kids go through what they need to go through in their life without making it worse, say.
I think that's right.
Yeah.
And here's sort of a way to think about stress that fits with what we know from the science.
Uh-huh.
That anytime there is a change in a person's life, there will be stress.
Mm.
So good change, bad change, any change. Like, so getting married, that's a stressful thing. Having a baby come into your home, that's a hugely stressful thing. Like, taking on like the job of your dreams, right? That's a very stressful thing. And that stress happens when we are operating at the edge of our capacities, right? That's why having a baby is so hard, right? Because you're just not built for it.
I'm not sleeping.
I'm not sleeping. And
I
I've
don't
never
know
done
what
this
to
before. I
do.
don't know what I'm doing, right? But then what happens is your capacities expand.
Mm.
And the way I like to think about stress, and of course there's chronic stress and traumatic stress, and none of that's okay. But the way we want to think about most stress is that it's basically equivalent to weightlifting, that you cannot build muscle without straining the muscles you have. And that when you stress your muscles, their capacities expand. And same thing with humans. When we ask people to take on things they have not done before, it is a stressful thing. And then they feel stressed and they step up to it, and their capacities expand, and they can now do things that they felt that they could not do. So a lot of stress falls into that category. And then anxiety. And this is really interesting on the gastrointestinal piece that you're talking about. So anxiety, right? This is our alarm system. This is what alerts us that something might not be right. And it can be an outside thing or an inside thing. So, when we're driving and somebody comes up fast behind us and we have that surge of anxiety, that is our alarm system saying, like, you got to pay attention to that driver, and maybe you want to let them pass, or maybe you want to move lanes, or maybe you want to keep an eye, that it's keeping us alert and aware, and that we only would do that because we get that surge of discomfort, right? And then same thing, if you're sitting somewhere and you suddenly remember that you didn't do something you were supposed to do, right? You get that kind of, whoops, I was supposed to be in a meeting, or I was supposed to make that phone call. And there is that kind of, physiological experience of your heart rate going up and your breathing maybe changing or maybe feeling a little sweaty. And that's the alarm saying, like, go fix this, like, go take care of things, right? So one of the things that we can do is, first of all, say, look, this is a normal and healthy function, and most people should feel anxious probably a couple times a day, right? I mean, that it's like, things are not always going so well in your day that you don't feel anxious. Like, it's expectable. But then the other thing that I really like to do with young people that I care for is to talk with them about the physiology of anxiety, because this we understand extremely well. And for young people, actually for most people, anxiety feels out of control. Like it feels panicky, right? That their heart is racing, and they may be clammy, and maybe they feel uncomfortable, or maybe they're breathing in a strange way. And one of the things that I find to be very, very helpful is to help people understand that what feels like an out of control system is actually a highly systematic physiological response, where the brain is conducting an orchestra almost of physiological responses that involves raising the heart rate, speeding up the breathing to get more oxygen into the blood that is now being pumped at a faster rate to the extremities. And that is happening so that your body is prepared to act. instinct, either to fight or to flee. And then also, and I say there's a whole lot of other stuff going on that you can't always detect. Your eyesight improves, your digestion stops. And the rationale, this, right, is that if you're running away from a saber-toothed tiger, because this is all handed down to us from our cave person ancestors, if you're running away from a saber-toothed tiger, you can't have to stop to go to the bathroom, right? So everything shuts down. So, and then what I say to them is, after the fact, your system resets, right? So, the sympathetic nervous system is the one that rings the alarm, and the parasympathetic nervous system unrings the alarm. It sets the system back, as it were. And so that is also means it starts up digestion again. Mm-hmm. And so I have had such a nice time. I know this sounds like so weird to say, with such a nice conversation with a terrific teenager who was complaining to me, if we're going to just sort of, talk bluntly, about the fact that she would get the runs on a date.
And kind of a problem if you're a teen, especially.
Right? She's adorable, right? And I was like, let me explain to you why that is happening. And I taught her about how the kind of really revved up, panicky feeling she felt when the date was starting, when that was being reset by her body, the effect of it is that her body was starting up her digestion again, which meant she had to kind of urgently go to the bathroom. And what is so interesting to me is how much relief I have watched young people get when they understand what is happening inside of their body, and they understand that there is a rationale and a system for it. Mm-hmm. And then I will go back and teach them how to use breathing to basically hack their nervous system and turn the system off much faster than they have done before. And again, I love to talk through the sort of the physiology of the nerves that connect that run from the brain to the lungs, and how it's a two-way street. And I'm happy to talk more about that. Mm-hmm. But the digestive piece and anxiety are, it's a logical connection. And it really helps people when they understand more, I have found, about how those two things come together.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with everything that you're saying. When I, like the clients I was mentioning earlier, helping them make sense of what's happening in their body and how it is a natural and normal response, I think is very helpful to that kind of layering anxiety on anxiety, right? So that they see that there's a beneficial purpose to all of it. And I think it can kind of neutralize them a little bit so that they're more open to more of that practical decision making. And it's quite often, I'll just ask, so have you ever heard of the vagus nerve?
Yeah.
And the answer is always no. And of course, the first thing, not like Las Vegas, but it is so helpful for them to understand that physiology piece, and in whatever way it comes out conversationally. But I do think that is, we are humans, and we need to make sense of how our bodies work and why they work, that I think then could help us get to problem solving for whatever that level of a problem is. Like you said, your sort of typical twice a day anxiety, typical test anxiety, typical life worries that come and go, as opposed to, okay, this is a bigger kind of when to worry scenario.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. And it's just so helpful, I think, to take something that has felt like it's out of control and to understand how systematic it really is.
Yeah.
Let's take a quick pause from this conversation for an important message from Bernie Salazar.
Hey listeners, Bernie Salazar here, asking you to support our show. Make your contribution at gofundme.com/bodykindness, and 100% of any amount you can give goes to offset the production expenses. If 20 people can donate $25, it pays for this episode. Again, that's gofundme.com/bodykindness to chip in and support our show. We're so grateful to have you as a listener, and we thank you for your support.
So it also sounds like what you're talking about is that, what parents need to know is the key is not to try to teach avoiding stress or anxiety like at all costs. right? Like, I mean, it's one thing to stop and plan so you're not overbooked, or, that there's, we've got to plan certain things. But if we're parenting from the mindset that all stress is bad, that anxiety is going to overwhelm you, we're actually being unhelpful. And so it's not about trying to teach avoiding it at all costs. It's about making sense of it, teaching like when it's normal, teaching noticing it in their body. I've got to think that in the teen years, like the same way their intuitive eating skills, like for noticing their hunger and fullness, isn't fully in check even, that there are other things that they're like their attunement, like they need probably help practicing their attunement skills. But then when they do notice it, it's more about that adaptation piece. Like, so first, I guess I want to make sure I'm understanding you right. And then secondly, if I am, what are some tips? Like, what should we tell parents how to kind of start to tackle some of this?
Well, so you're totally right. And in fact, one of the subsections in the book is titled Avoidance Feeds Anxiety. And we know this. We actually have like really excellent, again, not new basic science in psychology about the ways in which if we're nervous about something and we avoid it, it actually intensifies the anxiety we have about that thing when it comes around again. And so even though our instinct as a person and sometimes our instinct as a parent is like, oh, you're scared of that? Like, come over here, I'll protect you. That's where our parental instincts go. They actually are very unhelpful when there's something that's frightening. So we do need to help kids learn to approach things, even if it's in, the babyest of steps. I think for me, a way that we want to size up questions around like how to help kids manage is that we have to remember that unless a person is really has a pretty significant psychiatric disorder, like a diagnosed depression or a very, very out of control anxiety or something like that, most humans are built to self-regulate emotion. That the way we want to think about emotion, it's almost like a wave that crests and then crashes and recedes. And that happens without any intervention. That I think we forget that. We worry that, oh my gosh, my kid's emotional. It's only going to get bigger from here. I have to make it stop. But in truth, and I think a lot of us, if we can kind of plug back into, like, especially even being a teenager, like, remember how you'd have those days, you'd have a terrible day and you come home and you get in the shower and you cry and cry and cry. And then you get out and you'd be kind of over it.
Yeah. I feel great.
Right? I feel great. I actually feel sort of refreshed and renewed. And so what we have to remember is that humans, and teenagers being humans and kids, have a self-righting capacity that will take over. And that the way, psychologists talk about emotions is often the only way out is through. Like, if you're going to have a feeling, like, go have the feeling. And then having had it, it will recede and you will feel better. And so I think our job as grownups is when we're watching a kiddo have a hard feeling, our job is to not rush in or in any way give them the impression of like, oh my gosh, you seem very, very upset. Let's stop this now before it, spins out of control. I think instead what we want to communicate is like, okay, you're super upset. You're having a hard time. Come sit with me. I'll hang out with you. Is there something that would help you feel better? Do you just want, do you want to just, chill and have some tea while you ride this one out? I think that kind of confidence that we can try to communicate that they don't need to be frightened of their feelings. We are not frightened of their feelings. They will find their way through a hard thing. It may or may not require any real intervention. It just may be that the wave of emotion has to come and then recede. That is a pretty powerful thing. And I think sometimes in the rush and intensity of parenting, it's easy to forget that.
Yeah. I think that, and I think this is an area that with love and kindness and without judgment, but this is an area parents really need to work on, like, again, all parents as parents, we're human and we're going to make mistakes, right? But even if we were raised in that, just suck it up, buttercup, or like, it doesn't matter what our parents said to us, right? It matters what how we do things now and going forward. And I think that we need to remember that our kids are at a certainly age appropriate maturity and developmental place for their capacity to even know what's happening. And as a busy parent ourselves, right, it's like, oh gosh, we have another thing added to our bucket. So it's kind of like in our mind, we could be like, holy crap, another thing, da-da-da. And we kind of see the storm coming. But if we can remember, take a deep breath. I can have these thoughts running in my head while I know the right answer is to help my child feel and understand that the negative emotion has a beneficial purpose, that it is going to come and go and crash and recede, like you're saying. And if I can just help them breathe, feel, hey, it's okay to be here right now. Tell me if there's anything you can think of you need. I'm here to talk. I'm here to give you some space.
Yep.
Is there something I could do to help you? And it's like, regardless of what's happening in your mind, if the first thing out of your mouth is going to be like, oh, everyone has to deal with that. What are you complaining about? Or suck it up. Or you, even if you don't mean to, but you say things that just add to the stress and anxiety, that is really unhelpful. And so it might be hard for us, but that is exactly the thing we have to do. If we're parenting and being there for them, it's making sense of it ourselves and understanding, but also having that strength to, in the moment, doesn't matter if it's not a good time for us, it's happening now. How can I be present and be there for my child? Am I right?
Absolutely. For me, I think the time when our instinct is exactly what we want it to be is when our kids are toddlers and they scrape their knee. And you know how it can be pretty bloody and kind of messy when a kid does that. So my experience is that parents usually get that one totally right. And what happens is, for the child, first they look at their knee and then they look at the parent's face. And everything flows from what's on the parent's face. So if the parent does, and usually this is what parents do, they'll say, you're okay, come here, like, we'll get you cleaned up, like, that must have hurt, but don't worry, I got you, we'll get a Band-Aid, we'll get you cleaned up. That usually works exactly well, and it just is a perfect response. If the parent does, like, no, you're fine, brush it off, that doesn't feel good for the kid. And often the kid will get more upset, try to make the point of, like, no, I don't feel fine. Or if the parent panics, right, and is like, and loses it, then the kid also loses it. So I think that, most parents' instincts around the scrape knee are just perfect. And the goal in parenting is to hold on to those instincts when it's not a scraped knee, but it's a 14-year-old having a meltdown in your kitchen, and that, but if they can get back to that place that they did when that girl was a toddler, and just say, like, I hear you, you're okay, you're going to be all right, we'll bear through this, I'm not going to minimize it, I'm not going to panic. That tends to get kids what they need.
Yeah. So important. And we can always keep practicing that. I wanted to tell you, one of the things I love about your book is how you weave in story and story of your experience in working with these girls in school. And I wanted to bring up one of the stories in particular. So the name in the book is Niki. And this story stood out to me because she was a very good gymnast. And it mentioned that she had been doing gymnastics since the age of 4. So I have a 4.5-year-old who is on a pre-team in gymnastics. So I was like, oh my God, this is me right now. and it's so interesting, right? So, I mean, it all started with, like, oh, we need some summertime childcare. Look, there's a gymnastics camp, right? And it was just a week of they literally invite the parents, and you're like, you might as well just set my money on fire. Did I really pay for this? Because the kids touch their toes and do a somersault. And anyway, alas, on her last day, there's these 2 letters. And they were basically invitations for her to join both of their pre-teams, their competitive pre-team. And I was just like, and right away I was like, no. And then I sat with it for a little bit, and I was like, well, Isla, what's your favorite thing to do in gymnastics? And she mentioned trampoline. Well, one of them is tumbling and trampoline. And I looked into it a little bit, and, there were things I liked about it. Like, it was co-ed, I talked to the coaches, and they're like, it's about her getting some good coaching, but also having fun. Like, she's really young. This is about learning and having fun and being in a team. So anyway, we are on the pre-team, and it feels good right now, but they also have a gymnast who won a silver at Worlds this year. So I know that I know that it's fun for right now, and then eventually it can get to be too much. So, and that's basically the story of what was going on with Niki. And I don't know how much you'd like to elaborate on it, but one of the things that I appreciated about hearing is how you even noticed in your own work with her that's like, ooh, like I missed that underlying thing, like practically staring right at me to actually get to the root of the issue. And that's actually common. Parents and even helping professionals can miss that elephant in the room, so to speak. So what can you share about her story and why you decided to include her, and maybe in a way that would be helpful to listeners for the show?
Sure. So I feel compelled to say this. So all of the girls are, none of them would recognize themselves in the book,
Okay.
right? Like it's all, they're highly, because these are girls I care for in my clinical work.
So there's nobody named Niki.
No, there's no girl named Niki out there. So changing details that don't matter while keeping the heart of the story, right?
Okay.
So with this Niki, and I'm using finger quotes, with this Niki, what that story ends up being about, it's in chapter 6, which is about girls in the culture. And here are the chapter titles. So chapter 1 is coming to terms with stress and anxiety. So sort of understanding how these operate really.
Right.
Then chapter 2 is girls at home, which is about the transactions between parents and daughters that can make anxiety worse or better. Chapter 3 is girls among girls, which is about all of the stressful stuff that goes on once girls are in social settings. Chapter 4 is girls among boys, which is around the strain that arises in both peer and heterosexual romantic relationships with boys. And then chapter 5 is girls at school and all the strain that comes at school. And then chapter 6 is girls in the culture. So Niki is in chapter 6, and chapter 6 has 3 main sections, which have to do with, the demands our culture places on girls. So the 3 main issues are that we expect girls to be agreeable, that we expect girls to be transparent, that if they have a thought, they should share it, and if it's not a nice thought, they shouldn't have it. And then finally, that we expect girls to be attractive. So Niki's in the section around agreeability, and her story is that she's actually come to the place where she doesn't want to do gymnastics anymore, but she can't seem to communicate that effectively to her coach. She tried to say something, and the coach
gave her more work to do.
kind of said, like, no, don't quit, and also help with this other thing.
I was dying when I read that. I was like, that is every woman right now, and the fact that it happens to teen girls is infuriating and heartbreaking and unsurprising all in one.
All at once. Exactly. So what that story and then the text around it tries to unpack is, how do we help girls to stand up for themselves and to not do what people are asking? But where it becomes complicated, and this is its own long conversation, is, sometimes the advice we give them, which is just like, get in there and just say no, like tell them you're not doing it, and, be an assertive young person. Sometimes they can do that and sometimes they can't. Either the context doesn't allow it, or just as importantly, the girl's personality isn't there, that a lot of grown-up women wouldn't do that either.
I can't hurt their feelings. I can't.
Or exactly. The concerns about relationships are so, primary that the girl will sacrifice herself in the name of maintaining the relationship. So what the story with Niki allows me to unpack is some coaching we can give our daughters about how to stand up for themselves and actually turn people down while simultaneously improving their relationship with that person, if that's something they want to do. And it's I use her story to unpack actually really interesting literature I came across from the world of negotiation, actually, from the Harvard Negotiation Project, about how really, really skilled negotiators both decline while simultaneously moving a good conversation forward. And so it's funny because a lot of the thinking in under pressure comes from my work as a psychologist, but actually some of it comes from linguistics and some of it comes from negotiation, because I'm basically a pragmatist, and my job is to help girls, and it increasingly also adult women, feel that they have all the tools they need to navigate the environments they're in. And sometimes those tools are coming from my training, but when I feel like what I've got isn't enough, I'm really interested in getting creative and seeing what else is out there. And so Under Pressure also tries to bring in things that I have tried and tried that have worked.
Mhm.
I try a lot of things that don't work, and those aren't in there. But I do talk about sometimes, the various how I got to the place I did get by, various wrong turns and missteps. But that's the hope in the Niki story, is that we can increasingly coach our girls, and I have to tell you honestly, ourselves too, on how to protect our time without worrying about harming relationships.
Yeah. I think it's very helpful and powerful. And I'm so glad you reviewed the different parts of the book. That was, you beat me to it. That was next on my
Okay.
list, because what I wanted to also let listeners know is that there is really a vast majority of the book that it's really about helping them navigate their lives. So it's not this like how to, here's all the things that you need to fix in yourself as a parent, right? It's more about these are the things that they're going through, and here's how you can be supportive throughout. And it doesn't shy away from like today's real world necessary needs, right? So the needs we've always had, but also in today, right? With social media and the toxic mirror that it is. And also me too, right? And even our awareness of how racism still exists in our country, and the sort of tiptoeing around it that we do. And in fact, it makes me also want to bring up the story about Kendra. And
Yeah.
I just wondered, is it okay if I read like a sentence or two
Sure.
from her story?
Sure.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay. So this is also in the girls in the culture section. Scholars have documented in detail the chronic emotional and physiological stress that comes with living in the windstorm of prejudice. While it's not surprising that outright racism or xenophobia triggers fear and terror, research tells us that exposure to less overt bias also takes a heavy toll. Being told everyone can succeed if they really try, or asked, "How can I be racist? Many of my friends are Black," often leaves minority girls and young women putting a lot of mental energy into trying to make sense of such interactions in figuring out how to respond to them. So just me in my, like when I reflect on the last year or so of my life and where a lot of my learning and growing has gone, it has gone to, as a white woman and understanding the supremacy of my race, reading the book White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo several times was really helpful to me. And frankly, it has taught me things that I feel surprised and almost a bit angry that I'm not learning till my 40s. And so as a mom to two young girls, and as a person who does have a platform where I feel like I think that there is a way to try to be helpful, but just to really help understand, this really, really matters. And as a white person, there are things that you could do to help your child do better.
Yeah, no, it's such a big and powerful thing that needs to be addressed.
Mhm,
And it's interesting to write a book about stress and anxiety
mhm,
in girls. And obviously the major lens for the book is gender, right? I'm looking
right.
at the impact of gender. And of course, in any good writing, any considered writing, you're paying attention to where what you're saying does and maybe doesn't apply to everyone, right?
Mhm,
So it's important, and I do through the book, and I say this in the introduction. I touch on places where racial differences might inflect this finding or that finding or this experience and that experience.
mhm,
But the fact of the matter is, to be on the receiving end of prejudice as a
mhm,
function of one's skin color or religion
mhm,
or some other demographic
mhm,
is in and of itself an extraordinarily stressful and anxiety provoking thing.
mhm,
And so the book as a whole just looks at girls, right? And the experience of being female in our culture and human, but sort of female human especially. But then the thing that to me felt, I was struggling with this, and I talk in the book about, how to talk about this in a way that really is adequate, right? Which is
mhm,
very hard to do. But one of the things I do say, as part of the section you read, is every single thing in this book all girls struggle with. And then if you happen to not be a white girl in our culture, there is this whole other layer on top of all of that, right?
That's basically going to make it worse. It makes it
just
harder. It makes it
exacerbates
worse.
every last bit of this, right? And also the fact that those of us who happen to have been born into the dominant culture have to own that even if we do not see ourselves as racist, we may, and in fact often do, unwittingly either make the situation worse for people who are minorities or fail to do what we can to make it better. And so for me, the way I wrap up the book is to talk about that it is actually to own that and to grapple with that as a white person is an extraordinarily uncomfortable thing, which is, I think, why for the most part we just don't because we have that option of just sort of ignoring it. But what I say, and this is really my best effort to try to grapple with this is, the whole point of my book is that we can withstand anxiety and we can benefit from stress. And if I can't tolerate being anxious and stressed about what it means to be white in this culture and what I owe people who have not, by sheer lottery, been granted the kind of privilege that I have, well, then I'm not really doing my job, right? I am saying we can tolerate anxiety and we can manage stress and we in fact can grow and learn a huge amount from it. But, without question, if there's anything that is stressful and anxiety provoking for everyone, it is questions about race.
And, even helping readers understand that it is a systemic problem to acknowledge and then to take actions in ways where we personally can, but it's even progress naming it and acknowledging it as a systemic problem, that even if it's unintentional, right? Intention is an impact, and these microaggressions do add up, and they do cause problems with both physical and mental health. I was preparing for a talk on the neurobiology of dieting, and I found a publication that was in the Center for Disease Control and Prevention's own journal that it says, if you have any health-based community programs, that you should make them weight inclusive, and meaning not about weight loss, not about, nothing about it here. It's all about habits and about self-care. And they referenced the Black Women's Health Initiative, which is a long-term study that actually showed that much of the negative health consequences the women were experiencing were actually tied to racism and not, did I eat salmon for dinner tonight or not, And so I think that even saying those things and noticing those things, that it can have, a direct and significant impact on somebody's health. And it doesn't have to be, right? There's the big things that we could say that happen that are racist in our country. But I like that you took the approach about that it's these things that might not even be noticeable. And it's like, these tiny cuts that do make it extra challenging for a person to kind of get through and kind of build that resilience that they need to build to ride the waves of stress and anxiety.
That's right. And I was really grateful. I'm always so grateful to my colleagues who ask the right questions, right? And grateful to my colleagues who were looking at, questions of race and racism, and obviously being on the receiving end of just naked racism is a horrible thing and a stressful thing and an anxiety provoking thing. But these colleagues who also took the time and asked the right questions to explore, how taxing it is when a white person who feels they're being generous and well-meaning says, "Oh, I don't see race," and it comes from, usually a really well-meaning place. But what they were able to articulate is that leaves the person on the receiving end of that communication doing all of this work to try to figure out what to make of that communication and how to feel about that communication and how to reconcile the kind intention with which it was delivered with the reality of what it means to them. And I think those are the questions where if we can let ourselves, which we must, deal with that nuance and sit with that discomfort, then growth can happen.
Right. Yeah. And it's a reminder, like we were talking about earlier, we end up unintentionally isolating kids when they need us the most, if we make mistakes in that area. Well, I also wanted to bring it up because I wanted, I really want listeners to make sure they go out and buy the book. It's available now wherever books are sold. And I want them to really feel confident that this book is well-researched, highly credible, and just very, very forward-thinking. I mean, it is today. It's not going to be stuff that you have seen or read anywhere else because it's unique stories with, like you said, even pulling in research on negotiation and linguistics. It's presented in a very readable, helpful way that includes how you can learn through story, but also practical steps that you can take. What's your hope ultimately when this book is out in the world? Like, what do you hope the reader says when they're finished?
I hope that they feel so much more relaxed as a function of reading the book, so much more confident in their own and their daughter's durability, not frightened of stress and anxiety. I also hope that they feel that they walk away with a bunch of new, very, very practical things they can do in the immediate to help their daughters better weather the stress and anxiety that just comes with being a kid.
That's a beautiful way to end our conversation today. So the book, again, is Under Pressure, Confronting the Epidemic of Stress and Anxiety in Girls. And it's written by Lisa D'Amour, who is already a New York Times bestselling author of the book Untangled. And I know this is your next bestseller. I'm so excited for you.
Thank you. Thank you.
And thank you for being here today.
You bet. Thanks for having me.
And that's our show. The podcast is made possible with support from listeners. Please donate to help offset production costs at gofundme.com/bodykindness. And please rate and review the show when you have a moment. It really matters. Let's keep the conversations going on Facebook. Search Body Kindness and request to join the group for Body Kindness readers and listeners. Have a question for us to answer on a future episode? Visit bodykindnessbook.com/question. Body Kindness books and audiobooks are available wherever books are sold. To request a signed print copy, visit bodykindnessbook.com/order. For other questions about this podcast, please email info@bodykindnessbook.com.